Figure it out.
Hello, this is Adam Koralik from Figured Out Productions. The following video is a video of some kind, and I hope you enjoy it. Hey everyone, welcome to the Figure It Out cast for January 2021. We're finally out of 2020. What a horrible, horrible year, and I will never miss it. But anyway, we're back, and it's podcast time. I'm your host, Adam Koralik, and I am joined with, of course, Rob, who you guys voted. You voted to keep him around with your wallets, because this is a Patreon-backed podcast, meaning if we hit a certain threshold every month, Rob gets to stick around like some sort of bad season pass on a game. And one of the people who did that, though, is also joining us. Abdullah returns back to the podcast. First of all, welcome back, Abdullah. And secondly, Rob, how does it feel knowing that Abdullah holds your fate in his hands?
I wouldn't have it in anyone else's hands. I trust him implicitly.
Well, all right, Abdullah, how are you doing?
Welcome
back.
Thank you. First of all, hello to everyone who's listening, and you're welcome, Rob. Your fate is within my hands, so I can use it to my advantage now.
Love you, baby.
Hell yeah, dude, you control him.
All right, man, thank you so much. All right, no problem. So I control Rob now. Okay, great.
Yeah.
All right.
Rob is your slave.
You know what? I think Rob is doing a fantastic job.
Rob's okay.
Oh, hear that?
He's better than I give him credit for, but I have to pretend like he's not. It's kind of one of the rules.
You only keep me around for bathroom breaks during your 8-hour live streams.
That is so true. But anyway, but yeah, in all seriousness, again, everybody out there listening, thank you very much for joining us. As I mentioned, it's a Patreon-backed podcast, so if you join, you can get early access to it or early access to all the videos on my channel, depending on the tier. You can also pick subjects. You can get shout-outs, or you can be on the podcast, such as Abdullah here, who is very generous, who has joined us. But we're gonna just kick it off here. Let's get started. Is everybody ready to get on with our first subject?
Let's do it!
Let's do it, okay.
Yes, let's go.
Now, first subject here, because again, Abdullah's on, so he gets to pick a subject. He could have actually picked all of them, but he's such a generous guy. He was like, just one. I'm very modest, very humble. I'm just going to go with one.
All right, thank you.
You're welcome.
Actually, I'm not going to use the opportunity to overuse this.
To start hijacking it and be like, that's all mine now. I would do that. I mean, you have control over Rob.
I'm not going to. If I could do anything bad, I could have done it with Rob.
That's true. You have power over both of us. But at least for now, he's decided to be very reasonable with his power. I love the hesitation there. But he goes, okay, your question was, are there any ethical rules governing video game collecting? In other words, I'm assuming what you're saying is when it comes to people collecting stuff, is there any special rules we should all follow? Or do you want to clarify actually what you mean by that?
All right, sure, no problem. Okay, so let me clarify this in a very simple way. What I mean is that do you think, or are there any, or should there be, basically, any let's say, unspoken code of ethics regarding video game collecting? And that would not just be limited to between people, collector to collector, but to the collection itself. So what I mean is that are there any ethics governing getting a specific game, the way in which you would interact with other collectors, the way in which you would consider the game you have, preserve it? What if any, are there any ethical principles regarding that matter?
So that's interesting. So we have a term for that in English. It's just called an unwritten rule. That's basically what we call that. And I can...
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's just a simplified way of putting it. But basically, when I first saw the subject, I thought it was good. And there was only one that came to my mind, and Rob might have others. But the only one that I've ever seen anybody like really follow is... basically, first come, first serve. So like if Rob and I were to go into a store together and we're wandering around and I see this game that I'm like, oh man, that looks great. And then Rob comes over and he sees it and he wants the same exact game. I saw it first, so if I decide I want to pull the trigger on it, between the two of us, it's just a code of ethics. I got first dibs. I have the right of first refusal. And if I'd be like, you know what? No, I'm not going to take it. Then it's totally Rob's territory. Beyond that rule, at least immediately anyway, I can't think of any others. I mean, other than obvious ones like don't steal people's stuff and or whatever, but like that's like normal rules. But amongst collectors, that's the only one I can think of, and I'm sure people would want to point out like, oh, you shouldn't do things like scalping, and like that's not really a rule amongst collectors because that's a different. Collectors don't really do that. And I guess one of the rules would be things like, don't intentionally, if you find some old lady who's got like, a sealed copy of, some rare game or something and she has no idea what she has, you don't offer her like $1 and just be like a jerk about it. Like those are, but I think the average person is usually not in too many of those situations other than the one that I just described hypothetically with Rob. Rob, do you have any ideas?
Yeah, I've got a few. A couple of them piggyback off of your example that you brought up. I go game hunting with friends all the time, kind of go to thrift stores and flea markets and things like that. And we do follow that rule to a T, where it's first whoever saw it first kind of thing, or whoever, not even like laid hands on it, be like, oh, look at that, as opposed to, just like grabbing it off the shelf and holding it. We also have kind of a code between me and my friends that we do buy stuff to sell sometimes, like to flip and make money to buy something else, something along those lines. Not a lot, but to the point where me and my friends have agreed that if we find something cool, let's say, oh, wow, we find this Sega Genesis in a thrift shop. And maybe my friend John picks it up first and says, oh, I'd really want this, this is worth some money, I could flip this. And I might say, oh, you know what, I really kind of want that for my collection, I need a new Genesis. We'll always, okay, you know what, you have it. If you're going to have it for your own purposes, for your own collection, that takes precedence over selling it just to make a quick buck. So that's one. Also, the first come, first serve is, at least in my opinion, and in the opinion of a lot of people on like collecting groups on Facebook that I'm a part of, is that if you see something on Craigslist or Facebook Marketplace, let's say an old lady's got a sealed Little Samson, on Facebook. And let's say she's asking, $100 for it. And maybe Adam calls her, like gets in touch with her first. He's the first person to contact her about buying it, which means, in fairness, he would be at the head of the queue in most opinions. And let's say if I was the second one, and she says, oh, you know what, somebody already inquired about it before. The code of honor in my case would be, don't to be like, oh, well, it's like, I'll give you like double that. You know what you have, right? It's like, that guy's dicking you over, and you don't go behind another collector's back to gouge the price on him just because he or she got there first.
Okay, so you guys, I think you pretty much talked about this in one of the, I would say one of the most well-known aspects, which is the business side of the matter. Now, what I was saying, or what I think at least, is that video game collecting is not just about the business side of the matter. These ethics go even, I would say, have a historical aspect of them, which is when I get a game and say that game is a rare one and sealed one, I think it's an unspoken or something that's very basic that any collector who knows what they're doing should be able to know what to do and how to handle having this, say, a rare game or copy. Knowing the value of what a sealed game is and what isn't, and what it holds, I would say, significantly. There are things beyond just owning it that you have to do. Owning the game is the initial part, is just a starter. When you get the game, there are a lot of other things you have to follow. And I think there are lots of codes of ethics that you have to understand while doing this. That would include, one, there's something, I'm not sure if you guys have it over there in the community, but in our communities, this thing unfortunately exists with a few people. They do not share knowledge. And I think that's the biggest mistake that a lot of people, not a lot actually, a small few amount of people here have done it. But I think it's a huge mistake that has been done. Because if you don't share the knowledge of, say, something that's quite rare, I mean, that puts a really big black point on your side as a collector. Because as a collector, I believe, at least from my end, that the main job of a collector, or one of the main purposes a collector has, is preserving the history. At least that when it comes to mind. And I think ethics following preservation of history should apply as well to preserving the history of video games.
Yeah, I think that's actually a really good point. You know, like, I never really thought about it that way, because I kind of already do that naturally, because, like, I'll find things that I'll make videos about them. So I never really thought, you're probably right, there are definitely going to be people that buy stuff to hide it, as opposed to preserve it. Rob, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, there's always these stories of people having, like, cases of sealed stadium events that control the market and shit like that. So I definitely see that there's maybe this feeling that people are kind of hoarding stuff, or hoarding knowledge especially, not imparting it on the next generation of collectors. But I've never really experienced that myself personally.
I had just thought of another kind of unspoken rule, which is, have you ever done this where you go into a store and you see something rare or uncommon, and that you know that, and it's within a good price point, whatever, but you either have it or you yourself know that you're not going to appreciate it the way someone else does, so you just leave it? Like, this one time I was driving back from Canada to Chicago. So I was driving from Toronto. I went through Michigan. And I go through this, like, one store, and they have this section that has just a bunch of, like, surprisingly rare games in it. But it was all very cheap. I bought one because I knew I wanted it. But, like, they had a boxed copy of, like, Lunar for the PS1. It was, like, in perfect condition. It was, like, 10 or 20 bucks or something like that. And I was like, I know this is valuable. I know this is rare. But to me, this doesn't mean anything, and somebody else will appreciate this, and this will be like their big score that they're like really happy about. So I left it. I feel like that is another unwritten rule, but that one probably doesn't get honored as much. What do you think?
From my end, I think that's actually something. It is an unspoken rule, I believe so. If you know that you cannot maybe appreciate this, then keep it to the people who would be able to do so. I think that's the right thing.
Yeah, and you know, I've been working recently in since kind of the pandemic started. I took a part-time job at a video game store, Digital Press, in Clifton, New Jersey, and yeah, it's for me, it's all about, in my experiences with customers there, it's all about just being open and honest. Like, I've had a couple customers, because the prices of games are fluctuating so much, come up to me and say, hey, you know, I kind of want this, but, like, I got to be honest with you, it's a little underpriced or even a little overpriced. And I will take a look at the sold listings online to try and get a better gauge. And I appreciate that impartment of knowledge, you know, just saying like, oh, thanks for that heads up. Like, you know what, it's yours for that price if you want it, because you were honest and it's already marked as such. What I hate people doing is like buying it and then be like, you know, this was like marked like half price. It's like, you guys are idiots. You slipped up, you know, like that's the wrong way about doing it. So just being open and honest about the prices of games, or even like the validity of games. If a game is a reproduction, don't intentionally deceive anybody by saying that, oh yeah, this is a totally real copy of Earthbound when you got it off of AliExpress for $10. You know, just be truthful and be honest, and that's my biggest piece of advice.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. Yeah, I don't know if I have any. I don't know if I have any others. I think that in general, a lot of it is just common sense. You know, it's just don't be a dick. It's like the general rule, just don't be a dick.
That's the basic gist of it.
Yeah.
I definitely agree with that. But I think, as I told you, there should be some more. I think people. I mean, from my point of view, I think that there are specific things, like for example, things that I think all of us have mentioned. There are some specific things in what we mentioned that should be. We should shed more light upon these things in order to make sure that everyone worldwide, all collectors are basically united and not divided. That's how I would say it. Basically, that's
well
it.
said.
Yeah, I think that's fair, and that's a very high note to end that one on. I think. You guys ready to move on to the next subject?
Yeah, let's do it.
Sure.
Okay. So the next subject, actually, I'm glad you're with us, Abdullah, because for those who don't know, Abdullah is actually from the UAE, United Arab Emirates. So it's good to have an international perspective on some of these questions, and this one I think is very...
Thank you. Happy to be here.
Awesome. This one is very perfect for that. So Patreon backer Connor Wright asked, very specifically said, based on travels or just, what you know about the world, or in your case, because you actually live in a different country than we do, what are some of the different gaming trends around the world? So, and what he means by that is, like, here, some of the more popular games, historically speaking, would have been things like platformers or first-person shooters or whatever. But in other countries, and the one that I always go to mentally is, like, in Japan, not a lot of that actually. I mean, platformers were, but first-person shooters, not so much. But then they would have certain things would be super popular that would never work here, like date sims and graphic novels and those types of things, where they're at best a niche here, where there it's kind of like a regular mainstream type of thing. That's just one example. So can anybody come up with other examples, and like which countries are have trends like that?
Yeah. Well, may I start first?
Of course.
Okay.
You have power over Rob, remember?
Oh, yeah, okay. Well, Rob, this time I'll go before.
Yeah, go ahead.
All right, thank you. All right, so let me tell you that the perspective in our region of the country. People play almost everything. That's not an issue. But what I would say is mostly used here would probably be, from my experiences with a couple of colleagues and some of my friends, would be two things. And that would be shooting games like, the wars type of games, like, for example, Call of Duty and these things. And another thing would be that soccer games. I know I'm not sure if soccer games are very popular in your side of the world, but
No.
in our side it is extremely popular here, and people even have fights about that. And my friend at the game shop, Gamer Squad, his name is Said, we actually, every time I go there, we would play 10 matches or something. Every time I would go 10 soccer matches on PS4. That's a big trend all over the country here.
God,
it's common here because soccer is very common.
I'm glad you said that, because I totally forgot about that. Like, Americans, we never really think about soccer, to be honest. Like, I know it's super popular, like, in every other country. So I maybe I would have thought of that, because, in Europe, I know that, like, they call it football, obviously, and that's actually the correct term. We should be calling it that. It's super popular. Like, every year, that's like some of the biggest games of the year. And you're right. I think that would have spaced it, because here the sports games we have are like American hand egg, terrible bullshit sport. And our, that Madden games or whatever are like super successful here. And you're right. That's a great example of a regional success where that works in one country and it might get a limited release somewhere else, but not so much. And it kind of opens the door to the whole thing. Like, mostly, a lot of the big regional differences are going to be sporting-related games. Like, in Australia, for example, like, they have their own version of football. Australia, it's like kind of a rugby type of thing, from my understanding. The AFL. And, like, there's actually exclusive games, like, even on the original Xbox, that only came out in Australia, and all of them are, like, Australian football. So, that's actually... You have just cracked the code, my friend. Like, it's the sports games. Those are the big ones, which is kind of a disappointing answer, but it's true. It actually makes sense.
It actually is the biggest one, but I mean, just to wrap this up, basically the biggest, as I told you, the sports one, and other thing I would tell you is that here, unfortunately, there are some people who would frown upon platformers. It's not uncommon to find people who would frown upon platformers, but there is also a good chunk that would enjoy them. But these people would usually be leaning towards Nintendo. Nintendo guys would usually go for that. Usually people over here who are, because the PlayStation and the Xbox are more popular here, I would say. Perhaps the PlayStation is way more popular than the Xbox. However, you would unfortunately see that a lot of people over here actually not really interested or may a little bit frown upon platformers. And that's just a trend here. It's not a negative thing. It's just what people prefer over here. I mean, first goes PlayStation, then I think maybe Nintendo, and after that the Xbox.
It's fascinating. Yeah, the platformers thing, I'll bet you the historical reason for that is that they weren't, like we grew up on it. Like we've had it since the 80s and the 90s. But didn't we?
Yeah, that's right.
I kind of remember we talked about this. Like Nintendo didn't have much of a presence there until relatively recently, right? So there's not as much nostalgia built up for that concept. It's kind of fascinating.
Not the common people. There are few who have it. I mean, compared to the majority, yes, that's correct.
That's interesting. I'm trying to think. I know that racing games, like they're successful here, but in Europe it's like a whole different thing. Like that's a much bigger genre.
Yeah.
I've also noticed Germany in particular, those damn farming simulator games, and that's not a joke. Like we get those from time to time here, but in Germany they're like sports games. They come out like once a year. It's like it's Farming Simulator 2019. All right, everybody go pre-order. We got to make this happen. I don't know why. But a lot of those simulator games are super popular there, like Airport Simulator. I'm not even joking about these titles. Like these are real things, and they are actually very successful. It's funny. I thought we'd be focusing really on Japan because Japan's known for weird tastes. But damn, you opened the door, Abdullah. You crushed it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Rob, can you think of any?
Not really past what you and Abdullah have both kind of gone into, mainly like the Japanese, trends of dating sims and, visual novels, RPGs, shoot 'em ups, things like that. What I will say about it is I think you're starting to see less of a gap in regional differences because, like we generally demonize it on this channel, digital gaming and digital distribution and the rise of indie games have basically brought a lot of these previously niche genres to a wider release. That's why you're starting to see games like dating sims and visual novels that were only ever really released in Japan become popular in Europe and in America because they're available digitally, and they don't have to get physical print runs and take up store shelving, which allows it to gain a wider release and a wider appreciation.
I agree with you, but I think that's only part of the equation. I mean, the world is also smaller than it used to be. Like, air travel makes it super easy to get around. We obviously live in obviously the digital era, but like the movement of goods and services, not so bad. It's super easy now to communicate with people around the world. Like, I can message a friend in Japan and we can both speak the same language, because even if they only speak Japanese and I only speak English, like, a messaging system can translate automatically for you, so it's almost like you're not skipping a beat. And as the world becomes more homogenous in that way, tastes kind of blend and mix, and everybody's kind of into everything. I think that's also playing a role too. So
I mean, this podcast by itself is an example.
Yeah. There you go.
Yeah.
So there's people all over the world who are listening to this podcast. Granted, you still have to listen to it in English, but it's basically us just talking about the same things about cultures, but we're all kind of exposed to more of those cultures, and so we get a greater sense of what everybody likes. And I think we're actually it's weird. I know that wasn't really the subject at hand. It was like about what are the different trends, but we might actually be mutating this into being like, we might be nearing the end of a time where there even are unique individual trends in certain countries or regions just because of that, because everybody's kind of becoming more the same and tastes are becoming kind of the same. As in an RPG, there was a time, you know, a turn-based RPG, or also known as like whatever, a JRPG, Japanese RPG, right? Like it was its own thing. But those ended up becoming some of the most popular games that ever came out of there. And you know, I think it's becoming, everything is becoming less niche because of that. Would you agree, guys?
Yeah, well said.
Yeah, I do agree with that.
I'm trying to think if there's any,
I think,
you know, just to kind of appease Connor a bit, though, I'm trying to think if there's any other, like, genre in particular that I will just, like, never work. I still think graphic novels and date sims will probably never really work here. Although, there are games like Honey Pop here, and people seem to like that.
I mean, one of my, like, favorite games of the past 5 years is arguably a Japanese dating sim called Doki Doki Literature Club, which, devolves into like this amazing psychological horror game. So I think the subversion of the cliches and expectations of some of these niche genres are being kind of pushed forward now, and I really am all for that.
Yep. I want to be very clear. I'm not going with this like message of hippiness where we're all going to be the same. Like obviously cultures will be different. I'm simply saying that I think we're reaching a point where there's less and less nicheness to any particular genre because the whole world now has a greater chance to experience any of those. And naturally, there's going to be people in other regions when they have the chance to try that type of game, whatever it is, they're going to be like, you know what? That's kind of cool. Because before that option wasn't available, and now it's super easy to just investigate and find out what it is and see if you like it. That's all I'm really saying. Any other thoughts on this, anybody?
Nope.
I mean, I think everything has been summarized quite well.
Perfect. Then thank you very much to Connor for the subject, and we're going to move on to our next one, which is brought to us by Caleb, aka Sea Dog. He is the supreme overlord of my Discord, and he basically had a very simple question that I think ties into all of this, which is, what kind of difficulties have we had collecting stuff since the whole pandemic has started? And I'm going to let... who wants to kick this off?
I'll just kind of briefly say that I think the difficulties that I've really experienced are mainly due to pricing and just the severe uptick in prices, especially in that 5th and 6th generation of gaming, N64, PS2, GameCube, you know, Dreamcast. The pricing on so many of these systems has gone up a lot, partly due to timing of people wanting to, you know, buy those games again, but also because of the pandemic and the lockdown, the prices on so many video games have gone up, and it's kind of made it cost prohibitive for some people to buy these games. But also, I think I miss going to stores, as we spoke about earlier, going game hunting and going thrift shopping and flea markets to go in person. I miss that a lot, and I think that's probably the biggest difficulty.
Right on. So, okay. I've been thinking about this a lot, and it's actually kind of interesting how the pandemic has fundamentally changed how this works. Because if you guys remember, right before... I mean, Abdullah, I can't speak to your experience because the market might be different there, but at least in the U.S., right before the pandemic...
Well,
go ahead.
Yeah.
What?
Just want to notify. I think generally would be similar, because the answer that Rob gave was pretty much going to be the similar answer I was going to give.
Okay. Okay, so right before the pandemic started, though, you got to remember that the market in the U.S. was kind of changing. I'm not going to say retro was dying, because it certainly wasn't, but a lot of retro stores were going under. Like a few years ago, there was this big bubble where retro everything was super popular, and you were seeing tons and tons of new retro stores pop up all the time. But that was unsustainable, and a lot of them were closing down. And we were kind of at that point where the fever kind of broke for Super Nintendo and Sega Genesis and everything. And we were just starting to get to a point where 6th gen stuff was starting to take off. But when we got to the pandemic, a lot of things changed. Specifically, the 6th gen stuff blew up like insane, like way higher than I think anybody expected it to. But also the basic operation is different. You can't go out to retro stores anymore, and a lot of them couldn't really survive this. So a lot of that will be brought down. A lot of them are going to go under. Well, ironically, the prices go up, so the ones that survived will probably be in better shape than they ever were. So it'll be interesting to see what that's like when it's over. But things like conventions, like PRGE, which was like in the US anyway, the best retro gaming convention there is. It just is. It's huge. It's amazing. And it couldn't happen this year. So the opportunity to go to any of those types of conventions where you do the most of your buying, if you will, in the retro scene couldn't occur. So the method by which you get the games has changed, and the pricing has gone in accordance with that. So we're in a really weird transition as a result of the pandemic. And if I had to guess, I'd say coming out of it, the fever will break and a lot of the prices will go down. I think ultimately what's going to happen is a lot of people are going to feel silly. They really overpaid for a lot of stuff, and a lot of stores are going to be gone. Personally, from my own perspective, I miss being able to go to stores. I miss being able to go to conventions. And collecting wise, it's hurt my ability in particular to get a lot of retro stuff. I mean, if you watch Playload for pretty much all of 2020, you'll notice that it's pretty much all either newer stuff or just like random things that found their way to my desk one way or another. But I don't think I picked up like a single Sega Genesis game the entire year. You know what I mean? So with that in mind, I mean, Abdullah, what do you think? Has it been anything like that over there?
I think before answering that, you guys probably give the basic information, and I think it's generally trending in a very, very similar way. Speaking from personal experience, as you know, the way we get, I would say retro games, in my case, it's collecting retro games mostly, so you know, the way we get those here is that we depend a lot on shipping. So, whatever price spikes you get in your regions, I would say the main region personally, and a lot of the people here actually do get from is the US, as far as I know, and or North American in general, Japan as well, but that's a whole different story. So. What I would say is that any spikes you have would just fall. We would fall probably in line, especially when it comes to retro games, for example, because those are really we depend on shipping a lot for those, and that whatever spike you get, we get more here because we do have to include the importing part, and you know, because of the whole the pandemic and everything that happened, these regulations have gotten even more time, and people have lost money. And they're trying to recover it as well. So with all that in mind, and in addition to the fact that there was a lockdown, people who have collections actually, I would say, benefited from that, and people who didn't have collections would start actually to build up their collections because of that, and that in its basic sense is how prices go up. When there's high demand, you would get probably high prices. And basically, we've had a similar trend, and Rob mentioned specifically GameCube games, and this is one of the examples that I would bring up because personally I enjoy collecting GameCube games. The prices have gotten really high, and I'm talking about maybe 50%, sometimes even 100% higher than what I used to remember them a few months before the time of the lockdown.
Yeah, I agree. It's a weird time, man. You know, this whole thing is super weird. Rob, what do you think? Is it you like, you know, what else can you kind of add to all that? Like, what other problems have you possibly run into?
I think Abdullah kind of touched on a little bit is the shipping and availability of things. The pandemic and lockdown have forced collectors to go online to satisfying their collecting itch. And because of the lockdown putting such a strain on postal services, whether that be like the United States Post Office or FedEx, UPS, DHL, whatever, the supply lines are so stretched and so strained right now that, like, I ordered something from Japan in February, I believe it was right before the lockdown kind of started, and it just got delivered in like the beginning of December. it got held up that long because of the pandemic. So I think, this goes from ordering something simply off of eBay to buying something off of Best Buy, or importing things from other countries like Abdullah has been doing. The mail delays have been a real big problem, and people are complaining about it without really kind of understanding why it's happening. But it's because of the pandemic, it's because of defunding, it's because of a number of issues kind of relating to it that are causing these massive delays.
Yeah. So I think that kind of summarizes it. Like, we've all had difficulties, and I think that kind of exposes what a lot of them are. Any predictions on what the collecting world will be like after this?
Okay, so I'll answer this one. I think there might be. I don't think that, talking price-wise, I don't think prices would go down that easily, and I think people may get more appreciation or more into collecting because of whatever happened in the lockdown. During the lockdown times, people would get more into collecting as a way to say, okay, if we have another issue that's similar thing, we would have a collection. So I think from one side, people might actually get more into collecting, which might raise the prices even higher. From my knowledge, that collecting didn't get mainstream. Collecting got mainstream not so recently with many. Until after social media, I think that's when collecting got to a higher trend, and I think this would further expand it. There could be a possibility that things might go down, but from my experience, I don't think it will. That's my prediction only.
Okay, Rob?
I see the prices on 5th and 6th gen games holding steady at least for a couple more years. Just kind of looking back at the rise in prices of 3rd and 4th gen stuff before, it always hits a peak maybe about like 20 years after its launch. Just kind of the ebb and flow, but it's still so early in this peak that I at least see the prices holding steady for a little bit at least, maybe 2 years, kind of as this pandemic wears off, and everything, and maybe prices come back down to earth. But for the meantime, I think prices are going to stay.
What's going to be kind of interesting is to watch this the 7th gen stuff, because that stuff peaked super early because of the pandemic. Like, right before it, Wii's were like, a couple bucks, and now they're like $100 because everybody's just kind of going back and revisiting them because they're also super easy to use still. 360, PS3, and Wii. So traditionally, under a normal cycle, they should be basically garbage right now, and then starting to hit their stride in a few years, but they hit it really early. So I'm curious if there's going to be some sort of bubble burst with that, but I guess we won't know for a while.
Yeah.
Any other thoughts?
Yes, I would just like to shed the light on what you said, especially regarding the 7th gen, because I've seen that happen with PlayStation 3. I've seen that happen with PlayStation 3 specifically. The prices have gotten way higher than what I thought they would be. And further, I just wanted to elaborate on what Rob said as well. You talked about 5th and 6th gen prices getting higher, and I think that's absolutely right. I wanted to just say that, one more point I forgot to clarify is that the trends that have been going on with now the 5th and 6th gen being, as Rob said, would be steady, and things, keep spiking as they get older, or they hit a certain point where they spike a lot. I think the whole graph, basically, I would describe it, of all of things have gotten higher by itself. That would mean that the minimum has increased. I don't know if my point was clear, but basically I think every single console or thing you would collect, the price has gotten higher. Even the bare minimum by itself has gotten higher. I hope.
No, it is clear, but the logical conclusion of that is eventually that floor is going to come out from under all of that. Like it's only sustainable because everybody's trapped in their homes. But when they're not, the value is going to go down. And so you have to wonder, this is basically a different discussion entirely, but you have to wonder, like, I guess it kind of goes back to the first subject, your subject about the video game. The ethics, essentially. Like, who is being unethical by understanding what's happening and just trying to make as much money off of it as they possibly can? But that's a completely different discussion, but it's kind of interesting to see them kind of all circle in together. And I guess we will see how that eventually plays out. I would predict, as I already said most of my predictions, but I will also predict there will be a massive financial collapse in the value of a lot of the retro stuff we're picking up right now. Just 2020 in specific was a terrible year to buy retro stuff because everyone was doing it. I will bet you maybe by 2022, when like most of the world is vaccinated and so on, that a lot of people are going to be purging this crap, and it's going to be a great time to buy, but a terrible time to sell.
I think a lot of that has to do with any potential economic issue, another recession or depression that may be of a result of the pandemic and kind of the effects of it.
Yep.
Completely agree with what you guys just said.
Perfect. All right, well then, I think that does it for that particular subject, and I want to thank Abdullah for joining us. I know you were kind of on a limited time frame today. So
that's fine. Happy to have joined.
Appreciate it. So we'll press on without you, but so thank you very much for joining us, Abdullah. And
You're
obviously,
welcome.
Thank you for being on the podcast in general, supporting everything, and thank you for putting Rob in his place. He needs to really be brought down a peg. I appreciate that.
Sir, it's all right. It's fine. I'm gonna start a campaign to keep Rob.
I like this guy.
Yeah, me too.
Right.
I like this guy a lot.
It's pretty.
All right.
And happy New Year from the United States, by the way, Abdullah. It's always a pleasure.
Happy New Year to you too, and I hope that you have enjoyed your holidays, given the pandemic, and I hope that you have enjoyed and had a great holiday season.
Yeah, it wasn't too bad. I did an 8-hour live stream on Christmas Day. It was great.
And I saw part of that. Yeah, and thank you, by the way. I think you mentioned my name there.
I definitely did. Yeah.
yeah, and if you are ever here, of course, I'll be sure to show you around Dubai.
Yeah, that was the part I was talking about. Like, if people were asking, like, do you want to go to the Middle East? And I was like, I do want to go to Dubai.
I'm so sorry about the train, dude.
Oh yeah, fuck that train. If you guys have no idea what I'm talking about, I'm not repeating that story here. It is. If you go check out my,
we'll be here for another hour.
No, yeah, we would be. But go check out that. You don't have to watch the whole live stream. People love that story so much they found it in the time code and they just started typing it in the comments. So you can just click on my Czech Republic's train story. It's in the comments, and then you can click there and listen to me rant about it. It's great. But anyway, that'll do it, I think, for Abdullah. So thank you once again for joining us, man.
You're welcome. And just one note: if Rob is ever in Dubai, I'm getting him his own separate room.
Nice. I don't have to spend time with Rob.
Wait. You don't want a spoon? Because, I'll gladly spoon.
Yeah, Rob...
I'll be the little spoon.
Well,
Rob pays his rent with his body. Let's put it that way.
You know about that, Rob? Remove everything. You're coming to my house, you're getting my room. That's it.
Yeah!
Alright, it's full of video games over there, so that's fine. You'll be happy.
Yeah!
And Adam, you're coming to my game room.
Yes, sir.
All right, guys. Thank you so much.
It should go without saying, but the same applies. If you're ever in the States, please hit us up.
Yeah, you got
happy to hang
out.
You
can come.
Right,
you can come to Chicago or New York. Yeah, it's not really New York. It's like fake New York. It's New Jersey. It doesn't matter, but it's close enough.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, that's where Rob is.
All right.
We'll let you decide who has the better pizza.
Yeah, that actually would be
a
fun
sure,
discussion.
I love pizza.
That
of
would
course,
be a fun
that'll be.
All right, man.
Perfect.
Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you guys so much for the time. All right, you're welcome. Thank you guys again, and hopefully see you soon.
Yes, sir. See you next month. All right, we're at the point of the show now where we do a round of shout-outs. Now, all the following people are Patreon backers who are at the level in which they get a shout-out. And at any time, if you want to join up, you can get early access to this podcast, early access to all my videos. You can get a shout-out. You can choose subjects, as has already occurred. Or you can even be on the podcast like Abdullah was. We have our shout-outs. We go Julian Espinoza, who is now a rock star over in the Discord, by the way. He's constantly in there voice chatting with... Yeah, exactly. So go into the Discord. It's free. Rob is in the Discord, but also there's not that much Rob in the Discord, which is also one of the Patreon perks, is you don't have to see Rob in the Discord. But anyway, Julian Espinosa, Eduardo Cruz, Michael Kelly, Luis Bonilla, Joseph Tamburino, and Trey Wagner. Once again, that's Julian Espinosa, Eduardo Cruz, Michael Kelly, Luis Bonilla, Joseph Tamburino, and Trey Wagner. Thank you very much to every single one of you. Now, moving on, we have another subject here. This is also by a Patreon backer. This is by Leafy Poo. Now, you know Leafy Poo, Rob, don't you?
I'm trying to forget him, but I know.
Trying to forget him? No, he's great. But Leafy Poo, who has been on this podcast a couple of times, he is a backer. He gets to pick a subject. However, this month when I reached out to him, I never heard back, which is not really odd for Leafy Poo. He's an odd man of mystery. He just kind of comes and goes, and you never really know what he's planning on doing. So I picked a subject on his behalf, and I figured this would be one that he would like. So you probably heard, and it turns out I kind of broke the news on this story when it happened, and I didn't realize that. Terry Diebold, the guy who found and owned the Nintendo PlayStation prototype, he was a friend of mine. He passed away very suddenly. And I figured it was just kind of an interesting thing to talk about. Now, I would like to say this for the record, because there are details on his death that are not public yet. I have a couple of them, but it's not really... at the time we're recording this anyway, I don't know what the funeral plans are, or if, what all that stuff is about. None of that really matters for this discussion. But when I got a call from a friend of mine, basically telling it to me because his son found out first, logically so, and then he called up my friend, who called up me. And I started tweeting about it, and that's, I guess, when it kind of picked up. And I just want to say that Terry was a really good guy, and I just want to take time to talk a bit about not only his discovery, but just like kind of a bit about who he was. Now, Rob, did you ever get the chance to see the prototype?
Yeah, I met Terry and saw the prototype very, very briefly in, I guess it was AVGC, Video Game Con in New Jersey in 2016 or 2017. I forget which year. But, yeah, it was just kind of a quick, hello, thank you for bringing it kind of thing. But I know you and James Reiner were very close with him and spent a lot of time with him in the prototype. So my condolences to you and to his family and friends.
Yeah, thank you. James was actually the one that called me and told me about it, because Dan, his son, had told him first. And so it was, obviously it kind of took me by surprise, but none of that really matters. What matters is that I just want everybody to know, if you didn't know who Terry was, if you don't know the history of the Nintendo PlayStation prototype, I mean, we could go over it here, but basically, at one point in time, Nintendo and Sony were working together to make a new console that would be called the PlayStation, well before the Sony PlayStation we eventually got. The project fell apart, and for years, both Sony and Nintendo even denied it ever really happened. Years later, Olaf Olafsson, former head of eventually what would become the PlayStation division of North America, apparently there were 200 prototypes, and he was ordered to destroy them all, and he did, all but one. And then the one just stayed in his office. And long story short, with all of this, Terry ended up winning it in an estate sale. He wasn't even trying to win it. He was trying to win like some cups and saucers and stuff. And it was like Storage Wars style. He just kind of found it in there. And eventually, pictures came out on the internet of this thing, and his son Dan saw those pictures. He's like, "Oh yeah, my dad has that," and everybody thought he was a liar. And he ends up going to his dad's house, and they find the thing, and then they start showing it to everybody. The news, it blows up everywhere. He takes it to Ben Heck. Ben Heck does a bunch of repairs to it, and then Terry had choices. And this is where this tells you a lot about Terry's character. Terry was not a wealthy man. In fact, he actually had a lot of financial problems, even to what turns out to be towards the end of his life. And when all this happened, he was actually given multiple offers to buy the thing. One verifiably at about $2 million he was offered to buy the prototype. And he could have done that. And he could have just spent what turns out to be the last few years of his life, on an island somewhere, just enjoying the money and having a great time in retirement. But he didn't do that. Instead, what he did is he toured the world with it, going to at least Hong Kong and Monaco, the only places I know he went outside of the U.S. I think he went to Canada too. But he just basically went all around the U.S. to various conventions, like Rob mentioned, AVGC. I know I saw him at Portland Retro Game Expo, Missouri Game Con. I know he did a whole lot of them. And all he did when he went to these things is he just brought it out and he let people see it with their own eyes. He let you hold it with your own hands. You could play it.
You could lick it.
And you could lick it, as I did. That was special circumstances because Terry was a friend. But over time, after meeting Terry at multiples of these events, like the first time I met him was, I think, actually the same AVGC you were referring to. When I first saw it, I had done a video about it only like I had done 2 videos on the prototype. Once when it was still a rumor, well before Terry was known to have it, and then a second time once the news broke. And when I first met Terry, he didn't, it was just another guy walking around the convention. He didn't think anything of me. And then later he ran into me and he's like, I knew you looked familiar. Dude, my son, we watched your video. That's how we even knew what this thing was, or at least that's how we knew what rabbit hole to go down. So we talked for a while, and then I kept seeing him at conventions, and we would always hang out. And there would be times where I would be like the person guarding the prototype and all this sort of stuff. And the last time I got to see Terry was at Portland Retro Game Expo 2019. And at that point, that was going to be his last convention. That was his last hurrah. He wasn't going to be doing this anymore. And I knew that going in, and, everybody did. And I was talking to him for a long time, and I asked him, like, before you sell it, is it possible that I do, like, a formal review of it? Because up to that point, I was just, I got clips of it, and I would talk about it from a distance, as opposed to making a video specifically about it. And I asked him, like, is that okay? And he kind of was like, I don't know, because, at that point, he hadn't allowed really anyone to do that, just because, I don't know what his reasoning was entirely, but eventually he was just kind of like, you know what? Yeah, come on, it's cool, let's do this. So he said, come up to his room, his hotel room, along with my buddy Jesse, who I believe you know. And we went up there and he let me do the full review. I got great coverage of it, and then he sat down and he did an interview with me, telling like the full story out loud. So if you're ever curious, like what happened, how this thing came to be, that video exists on my channel. You can watch that. You can see in Terry's own words the story of what really went down, and what his goals were. And when I did all this review and everything, all the footage I was filming, I realized the next day, when PRGE was wrapping up, that at that point I was hanging around with Terry a lot, and I was actually the one who had set up the console, because I guess if you remember Go Collect, they were the guys that brought Terry to his last convention. Because the thing people don't understand is Terry was not making money at these conventions ever. In fact, he told me in all the conventions he ever did, the only convention that gave him anything was the Missouri Game Con. They would give him a couple $100 in cash, but he's like, everybody else without fail just was willing to sometimes cover the hotels or willing to cover the airfare, and that was it. Everything else was out of pocket for him. But in the case of PRGE, Go Collect wanted to fund his entire thing. So as a result, he was hanging with them a lot, and they wanted some help setting the console up, because he had just had it connected to a modern television with like composite cables. And I'll never forget this. At one point, he finds me hanging near the Marseille booth with Jesse. Marseille, they do the M Classic stuff. Terry comes and finds me, and he's like, I need you to come here. You gotta come do your nerd thing. I was like, what are you talking about? And he brought me over to the Go Collect booth, and he's like, do the thing where you connect it with that M Classic thing, and you make it look good. Do your nerd thing. And I was like, okay. So I'm sitting there with all the Go Collect people, and they're just like wondering why some guy they don't know is just sitting here like tinkering with the prototype that's worth, who knows how much money at that time. Just doing all this. Like, Terry trusted me enough with that to just be the guy who would tinker with it. And then I had it all set up, running RGB out through the HD Retrovision component cables to a RetroTink 2X to an M Classic. So the thing never looked better, and that was like its swan song. It got to go out that way. And I realized as the convention was winding down that I was going to be the one decommissioning it. I was going to be the one disconnecting it and everything. And I realized that that actually gave me the opportunity to be the last person who would ever play it, at least publicly. And so I filmed that. That's actually in my video. And after that, shortly after that, it was sold to the guy who runs pets.com, or at least founded pets.com, whatever that is. And that guy apparently just kind of buried it in a vault somewhere. You know, like, we don't really know what happened to it since. I don't think it'll ever see the light of day in another convention or anything. So, and I realize this story is kind of, it sounds like it's more about me than it is about Terry. But the thing is, that's how I knew Terry. I knew Terry as that guy who could have cashed out super early, but he didn't. He decided to give us all those kinds of experiences. And I think I got to be closer to it than probably anybody else, aside from maybe Ben Heck. And I'm just super grateful that he would have trusted me with that, because I respect console history, and I don't know, the idea of being so close to something so unique in gaming history, thanks to just the generosity of this man, is incredible. And I wish I had any real way to viably pay him back for that, because, you know, the next day he and I went out to dinner with Go Collect, and he was super appreciative of me because I had talked Go Collect into taking us out for steaks somehow. And Terry was very much a steak and potato type of guy. So he's like, yeah, free steak. But yeah, we had a great time. And then we actually had the same connecting flight. Like, we were both, he was going to Philly, I was going to Chicago. We both had to transfer in Denver. So we were on the same flight together. But then obviously from there we switched. And that was the last time I ever saw him. You know, I talked to him a couple times after that. You know, he had sold the prototype, and he was in the process of selling it, all that stuff. And then he just kind of vanished from the internet. Like, his Facebook went off, his Instagram went off. He just turned everything off. I think he was, I don't pretend to know this, but I think he was probably getting a lot of, I'm not going to say harassment, but judgment per se on the internet for having sold it. But he also sold it for substantially less than was originally offered to him. And I don't know this, but I would like to believe that what he ended up with, he went, he took, and he just kind of partied until that was it. So hopefully, you know, he got to enjoy that a little bit before, because he deserved it. Anyway, sorry. I know it's kind of all over the place.
No, it's it's really fitting, for Terry, for not being, I don't know, I guess I would call one of the initiated, video game kind of, personalities or whatever. His openness and willingness to let this thing be seen, let it be studied and documented, for the cause of video game preservation and video game history should not be discounted whatsoever. Because he could have, charged people to see it like a carnival sideshow, or he could have locked it up in a vault like the Pets.com guy did. But during the time that he had this and he showed it to the world, this thing was kind of taken apart, put back together by engineers, by historians, to the fact that we know everything about this now. It was kind of an unknown quantity. We know what it's capable of. We know what it supported, what it would have looked like as a final retail unit. It's his generosity in doing that and letting kind of the video game history personalities and engineers really kind of go over this with a fine-tooth comb should be absolutely applauded.
I agree. And the BIOS in the thing was unique. It was its own proprietary format, and They dumped it to the internet. They're just like, go ahead, open source code, go nuts. And only one game was ever produced for it, which at least that ran on it, which was Super Boss Gaiden, which is a game made about Terry. The premise of the game is like the head of Sony finds out that their Nintendo PlayStation prototype is leaked, and so the Sony executive has to run around beating up all of his employees in rage, and if you don't beat up enough employees, you lose. And that's just Super Boss Gaiden. And it's a free game. You can download it on the internet. It runs on a Super Nintendo or a Super Famicom, but they actually got a disc-based version that worked on it. Now, the only thing I would add to my video that I didn't know at the time is something Ben Heck told me when I met up with him very early in 2020. It was literally a year ago, which is insane, when we were working on the Sega Pluto prototype. And he was telling me something about how the Nintendo PlayStation was kind of odd to him, because it was his theory that the real reason all of it didn't go forward, if you remember, there was all this controversy over the disc-based games and, like, you know, who would get the money from anything disc-based, and it turns out it would have been Sony that gets everything, even if Nintendo was making games for the disc-based hardware. But he said the strange thing about the disc-based hardware and the power of it, he was like, it was barely more capable than a Super Nintendo. He's like, this is not like the Sega CD where it added a whole bunch of features that Genesis couldn't do. He was like, this was Super Nintendo games with better music. He's like, that's it. That's all it could do. And so his idea was, if they had that much trouble with the finances and everything, he's like, Sony would have been truly ripping Nintendo off with this. Because Nintendo would have been making like Super Mario All-Stars, for example, but with CD quality audio. And that's the only difference. And Sony would have got all that money instead of Nintendo. So it's really not surprising Nintendo wouldn't want any part of it, since the CD thing, aside from music, really added nothing. And I was like, that's kind of a fascinating point that nobody has ever really talked about in a video. I mean, I don't think Terry was even aware of that. Because as Rob just pointed out, Terry was not a video game connoisseur. It wasn't his thing, like, at all. He was just a dude who stumbled upon the rarest thing ever and was cool enough to share it with everybody. So I will always appreciate and respect him for that, and I hope he rests in peace. And the gaming community is better for what he did. You know, even if he didn't really intend it that way, he did do the coolest thing. And I mean, you can see the financial hit it took on him. Not only was he making no money, you know, he was doing very badly. I hate to say that, but he was, financially speaking, he was doing very poorly. And you can argue that his actions of taking it around the world and demystifying it for everybody for free, everybody got to see that, really hurt him financially, because he at one point had an offer of like literally $2 million verified, $2 million. He ended up with 337,000. That is a huge decrease. And one could argue that he lost all of that because he devalued it by giving it away for free. So when anybody gives him any crap for, you know, like, oh, he should have put it in a museum or whatever, like, dude, he made a traveling museum and he completely allowed everyone exposure to it. You could not have asked for a better owner of that thing. So, yeah, that's my final thoughts on Terry. If you have anything else to say, please.
No, I think you've summarized it very well.
All right, man. Leafy, I know you didn't really intend that subject, but that's in honor of you, buddy. All right, so we'll move on. We got a couple other subjects here, more pleasant ones, but this is for the super nerds because we're done with video games for today. I'm just gonna start it by saying this: Wonder Woman 1984 was garbage. like what the hell was that movie? You've seen it, right?
And I will respond by saying that Wonder Woman 84 was perfectly fine.
What? You cannot be serious.
Yep.
Did you get, like, do you have brain damage? I honestly...
I think you're just so cynical to DC properties at this point that you just can't see
no.
through the trees.
Hell no. All right, I want you to honestly tell me what about Wonder Woman 1984 was redeemable to you.
I thought that this movie was the perfect movie for this year, and after what people have gone through... politically, economically, socially, medically, with the pandemic and everything, the level of cynicism and depression and just kind of like thinking that the world is shit and everything is shit is so pervasive in today's society that this movie, it's uplifting, it's funny, not hilarious, but it's fun. It's a happy-go-lucky movie with a good message. And it kind of follows the same track that a lot of the DC films have been taking over the past, I'd say, maybe like 4 years. Actually, really since the original Wonder Woman, of kind of breaking away from that Zack Snyder, grimdark, vibe, and leaning more into the colorful nature and the history of these characters. And I think that the way Wonder Woman 84 embraces its history in the comics, from the TV shows, by bringing back Linda Carter and the Invisible Jet, and like working all of these interesting callbacks and tropes from DC history and Wonder Woman history, should really be applauded, because it's doing something different. It's not formulaic. The villain certainly isn't. I just think is it a perfect movie? Hell no. Very few movies are. But I think for what it was trying to accomplish in being kind of a movie for kids, a movie for people that are kind of cynical and and broken after the past year that we've all been through, I think it serves that purpose fine. Not as a great film, not as an amazing film, but as a perfectly fine film.
Jesus Christ. Okay, I'm gonna put you sound like you're describing the Wonder Woman from like 2017. I would have agreed with you on that. This one was like nothing you just said. I gotta say, like, there's a handful of things I like about this movie that I'm glad to give it credit for. I love that Patty Jenkins made the decision to shoot this on film as opposed to shooting it digitally. I think that gave it a more authentic look for the basic tone I think they were going for. I like Gal Gadot, or Gal Gadot, I've heard it pronounced both ways. I like her overall as Wonder Woman. I think she did perfectly fine in most contexts in that scene. I think her little, the long diatribe she threw out at the end about telling the truth and all that stuff and just endlessly rambling, I think that was a little too much for her range. I don't think she was really good in that part, is all I'm saying. The Linda Carter thing at the end, I think most people are actually just taking a shit on. I actually liked that, but for completely different reasons. Not because of the nostalgia for her, which I don't have, nor is it even typically normal to end a movie with a direct address the way she did. But the one prop I'll give them on that is DC is setting up a multiverse thing where they're going to jump from continuities to continuities, and that was an interesting little clue into it, possibly, or at least you can look back at it as like, oh, she jumped universes. Like, I'll give him props for that in the overall tapestry type of thing. That's pretty much the end of the list. The rest of the movie I would actually deem as like Battlefield Earth level unwatchable. I mean, it's bad. Like, I'm like, first of all, you have that opening scene that's like the Olympics thing, which was the basic point of it was, hey, Deanna, don't cheat. And that's about it. Like, it's, you want to illustrate that visually. Hey, I'm on your side. But doing it for 20 minutes when it's really mostly irrelevant, it seems like it's some sort of contractual holdover because you have Robin Wright Penn and some of these other actresses in there and these big set pieces that you felt the need to maintain it. A competent editor would not have allowed that because it just completely disrupts the story flow, and really you take forever before you get anywhere. Then you have the mall sequence, which is, not to get political here, is definitely a throwback to that little remnant we had there of the not feminist oriented movies, but I would say, female centric movies, where it's not just you have a female lead, you have movies that are all about how women are much betterer than all men and all men are stupid, which that doesn't piss me off as a man. I couldn't care about that any less. But what I do care about is just competent storytelling. When you have every person in that scene is just a complete idiot and it's just obnoxious to watch, that's brutally stupid for both sides, because it makes Wonder Woman look like she needs her opponent to be morons in order to be successful, and I think that's dumb. But the whole sequence itself was, again, another strange long intro that really didn't establish much of anything, and it flies in the face of continuity that DC has been going for, because Wonder Woman, it's very clearly established in between other properties that she did her events of Wonder Woman 1, and then she just essentially stayed under the radar for really until the events of Batman v Superman. Maybe that would have been a good story. 1984 would have been something she has to solve really under the radar. But when she's like out flashing around in public all the time, doing shit that a human being can't do, and like their excuse is, oh, she destroyed some cameras. But people have eyes. This is 1984. This is not 1884. There's verifiable ways to prove that this occurred. I hated everything about that from a continuity standpoint. To me, the behind the scenes producer role came in, and I'm like, what happened here is that, particularly Patty Jenkins, she had all this credibility from the first movie because she made a good movie, even though she didn't write that movie. But she had all this credibility to be like, I want to make another Wonder Woman. This time I want to write it, and I'm going to just do what I want. And Warner Brothers is just going to have to let me do it because I have this much power. I'm not going to care what happened in Justice League. I'm with Gal Gadot because she's cast, but aside from that, I'm going to do whatever I want. So she's not caring about continuity.
But
And
I mean,
that's
that's DC in general now. It's like, are you really complaining about continuity between Batman v Superman?
Yes.
It's like,
I am.
The way I look about this, and I'm speaking to a fellow Godzilla fan, is basically like the Godzilla movies. It has its jumping off point, Godzilla King of the Monsters, Gojira, and then every other one is basically just like a direct kind of sequel to that without acknowledging all of the other, 20 other movies in the chain.
That's not accurate within the Godzilla universe at all.
Well,
they're broken up into different eras. There's Showa, there's Heisei. They're broken up into different ones. Yeah, and they are considered sequels within a single continuity.
No, but the Millennium series, the more recent Toho ones, were that specifically.
Yes, I know.
84,
they were intended
got
reboots.
rid of that. But that's my point is that. Like,
that's a different discussion.
DC's trying to get away from this Marvel MCU like continuity and basically just trying to tell stories, And if they want to tell a story in the 80s with Wonder Woman, fuck it, just do it.
No, I completely disagree with you on that. I think that's at best half true. If you go ahead, watch about, there's literally a recent interview with Walter Hamada, he's the head of Warner Brothers, talking about how they're splitting into things like the multiverse. We now have an official name for the Justice League universe, which is Earth 1, and the Matt Reeves Batman universe is called Earth 2. They're splitting this up with some sort of linking event. The problem is that kind of works when your Batman is Ben Affleck in one continuity, Michael Keaton in another continuity, Robert Pattinson in another continuity, Christian Bale in another continuity. It doesn't work when you have Gal Gadot playing the same Wonder Woman in 3 different continuities. That's where it starts to fall on its face. Now that is just me being a nerd talking about continuity. That's not about this film in particular, though it's definitely a hindrance to its overall value. But the same could be said of like the Aquaman movie when it takes place after Justice League, and then the water, like they throw all the, the ships and all the garbage onto land, but apparently none of the other Justice League members, including Superman, even care. You know what I mean? Like, that's different. This takes place before it, and so it creates a conflict within just her own storyline. But okay, we ignore that. We move on. So you look at the rest of the movie, you get eventually to the magic wishing stone thing. You have Kristen Wiig playing Kristen Wiig, which was weird. I mean, she gets 2 wishes in this movie, which nobody else does. I mean, that's what we get into a strange wishing movie. And you have to start accepting that everyone in the world, first of all, they change the rules of the magic. So it's not like you have to touch the stone. Oh, now you have to touch this guy, and he has to trick you into asking you to wish for something. So that's point number 1. Then you have to it's suddenly now you can broadcast the message instead, and we have special lasers in 1984 that allow that to be possible. I don't know what that means. Okay, everybody in the world gets a wish. Now I think we know, just based on the world we live in, that if everybody was granted a wish, somebody would just be like, oh, I wish the world blew up, and it just would. Like the idea that it, like you could have everything be chaos but still somewhat functional, absurd. Then the idea at the end of rolling that back by having everybody just recanting their wishes, absurd, because you guarantee there's plenty of people that wouldn't. And then, unlike most movies where everything goes insane and they have to roll it back to the beginning, in this context, they don't really do that. They're like, hey, remember that weird day when the entire world went bananas and everybody's wishes were granted, then it went away? That stays within their memory. It's not like a memory fade. It's not like Superman 1 where he rolls back time. Like, there's too many like logic leaping moments in this movie that just crack, and your suspension of disbelief is utterly broken. Other things like the whole Steve Trevor thing is ridiculous. Not only does he not, he comes back, but he comes back by essentially inhabiting the body of another person against that guy's will. And it's never really made clear if the guy now looks like Steve Trevor to everyone, if it just looks like Steve Trevor to Wonder Woman, or if it looks like Steve Trevor to us, the audience. But even, I think my most likely explanation for that is that he looks like that actor who is not Chris Pine to everyone, including Gal Gadot. She's just accepted him as Steve Trevor. And for the audience's perspective, it looks like Steve Trevor for them, which is the reason I believe that is, everybody else reacts to him like he's the other guy. But also, at the very end, she's like flirting with the guy who she had the body of, as if it's the same guy. So you have to live in this world where Wonder Woman essentially had no qualms about taking over this guy's life. And I guess kind of engaging in sexual exploits with him, potentially against his will, though be realistic, he probably wouldn't be against it unless he's like, you don't know. He might have been a married guy or something. We don't know. None of that is ever addressed. So it doesn't really speak well of her character in general. There's just too many, what moments in that movie, in addition to just like the Spider-Man 3 issues of like extra villains. Like, we have I'm not going to call him an intelligent villain.
Pedro Pascal.
I already forgot his name. The one that Pedro Pascal plays. Right. His character is supposed to be your thought-provoking villain because he's not a physical muscle that can fight Wonder Woman. So he's got this plan. His plan is something an 8-year-old would write. It's just stupid. Like, I'm going to have magical wishes, and then I'm going to... Whatever. That's dumb on the face of it. So they don't have that, so they have to inject Cheetah into it. And she is like the stereotype of... There's so many of these characters. There's Jim Carrey in Batman Forever, his version of the Riddler. There's Jamie Foxx's The Amazing Spider-Man 2, where he's just like a nerd. And a bunch of superhero movies have done this, where they have like some super nerdy character who's just like, I was basically nice, and then something happened, and now I'm like all badass and hot and shit, and like I'm gonna fight the villain. Like their tone, I'm so tired of that. I cannot believe it was an odd throwback because maybe that's the point. It's 1984, but if that was the point, it wasn't handled smoothly. So all I'm saying is, I think that this movie was an overloaded clusterfuck with no real ambitions other than let's just be weird. I think that this is a sign that Patty Jenkins is a very talented filmmaker, but she hasn't written a narrative, since 2003. She did the movie Monster, which was actually pretty good. But she hasn't... I think that I'm a little worried about whatever Wonder Woman adventure is next. And now she's on top of Star Wars Rogue Squadron. I think she's a very competent director, but I think she's kind of like Dan Aykroyd, or maybe even to a lesser extent George Lucas, where like 35% of what they wrote is genius, and you kind of need to filter out the rest. And I think that's a situation here where there are some core concepts in this movie that do work, but you needed someone to filter out all that insanity, and she wasn't going to filter herself.
Yeah.
Does that?
Well, I think that's I think honestly that about like kind of summarizes it. Honestly, like our two sides of this are the two sides that are playing out in fucking Rotten Tomatoes and IMDb. It's like, it's a divisive movie. It's its core, issues are a detriment to it and make it unwatchable to some people. But, in others' opinions, mine self included, that I think its charm and just the way it doesn't take itself too seriously, is a virtue to it that allows it to just be... It allows it to just be a stupid comic book movie. Like, without overarching themes that were like, how is this going to set up the next villain in the DCEU? Or how does this tie into the larger overall multiverse? And it's just like, it's a stupid comic book movie for kids and people. It was released on Christmas. My biggest problem with it really is the pacing issues, and I honestly think that's because it was debuted on streaming services. I think it was about a half hour too long, and they kind of padded it out.
Oh, it was definitely too long. Definitely
and
too long.
I think that was just of like, oh, well, it's on streaming. You don't have to worry about show times in movie theaters making it under 2 hours. So this is basically the bloated director's cut in in a theatrical release.
All right, so first of all, that is an interesting point about the streaming service, although I do wonder if that is true, because I believe they had picture lock on this much earlier this year. There is actually, you can look this up, Warner Brothers actually desperately tried to get Patty Jenkins to cut out one of the two intro scenes, either the mall sequence or the Olympics thing. I'm leaning more towards the Olympics thing because it really had no point, because the movie never really gets going, and it just takes forever to do anything. But anyway... So that's an interesting point about streaming. I would love to know if that's actually true. The other thing, though, that you mentioned about...
I couldn't imagine them putting much more stuff in. It feels like they just left everything from the screenplay.
Yeah, I kind of hear you on that. Yeah. I just wonder if that's actually verifiable, because, I mean, they only made that announcement not that long ago. And I know AT&T, who is the parent company of all of these guys, is the one mandating that a lot of this stuff gets thrown up digitally on HBO Max, and Warner Brothers is kind of against all of this. So I find it unlikely that Warner Brothers said, oh, well, that's cool, add a half hour. Unless they were trying to intentionally torpedo HBO Max, which would be a whole different discussion, but because apparently they're their boss, but they don't really get along with their boss, let's put it that way. None of that really matters right now. The other thing you mentioned, though, is about the continuity between movies. Now, I want it to be very clear that that is not a core reason I dislike this movie. It just adds to, like, the echo around it, really. But I actually, like I said before, I'm very cool with the idea of there being movies. Like, it's not like because she says in Wonder Woman 1, like, oh, I did nothing after this, like, until Justice League or Batman v Superman, that you can just have no stories. I just wanted them to be smarter and vastly more subtle. And that's not what we got. It's not hard to fit in a story that would function within continuity and still be good. She doesn't need to, like, blow up things all over. Like, the thing is, that movie had so much insane stuff that happened in it that is not in any way removed from the narrative at the end. There's no, like, somebody wished that nobody remembered any of this crap. That it's just impossible to not see that would have changed the world. That would be like, if 9/11 happened and then the day later we're all like, well, remember when that happened? No, I don't remember that. It didn't change anything. Like, it's too significant for that to have not changed the entirety of the human race. I mean, literally everyone on Earth got to wish for whatever they wanted, and then they had to unwish it. So people died, people were born again, like... And that's just, like, at the bare minimum. In addition to those crazy things like that giant wall being built, all that stuff, like, it's too much to ask. You're bending the suspension of disbelief to the point of shattering it. And that's just within a self-contained movie. If you want to argue self-contained movie, you can't really do that either, because you're essentially saying, I don't care where it fits in continuity. Well, then it still doesn't work, because it's a sequel with no established character. Pretend there is no first Wonder Woman, there is no Justice League, there is no Batman v Superman. How does that movie hold up to you? Who's this little girl? What is this movie about? Who is this woman? Is this the same woman? It's expecting you going into it to fully understand who Wonder Woman is. And you only know that because you saw the previous movie, so don't tell me that continuity doesn't matter.
No, I think its continuity with the first one is perfectly fine. I don't think there's anything, I don't think it rewrites anything from the first Wonder Woman movie that takes place 60 years before this, and it's basically like she's basically she fell in love with the first man she ever met, which is like, okay, yeah, feminists, like, I kind of agree with you on that, but whatever. But like she harbors this love that, like, this man sacrificed his life for her, and she's basically a god, and she can't let it go. So when she gets the chance, and I will disagree with you, I loved Pedro Pascal's villain in this because I felt he was a perfect character of the time in which the movie is set. He's like an 80s infomercial fucking television preacher.
I know what he is.
I love it. I think it's...
I know what he is.
It's basically, what if you gave, like, Pat Robertson, from 1984, like, mystical, like, wish-granting powers? Probably something like that.
Again... All I'm saying is, I want to be very clear about this. As a concept, I don't think he is a bad villain. In fact, that's what I've been trying to say, is that she needed a much more subtle movie. And he's a perfect subtle villain because he can do political manipulation behind the scenes type of stuff. Where you go insane is like magical wishes that the whole world would clearly be very aware of. And then that's not good enough for the screen time, so you have to have a monster thing for her to fight. It's Spider-Man 3 syndrome, where, Raimi just wanted the more psychological element with the Sandman. Granted, you can still fight that, and then studio interferes and says, oh, no, you gotta have Venom because fans want Venom, and it's overload. Like, you're doing disservice to both of those villains when they're both functional on their own. He is actually perfect for the concept of a movie where she's still in hiding, because he is a political evil force set in a very crazy time in the 80s, at the rise of that type of figure. And if she's the only resistance to it, but she has to be quiet about it, that's interesting. But it's not handled like that at all. It's handled like a really poorly written Saturday morning cartoon. So yeah, I was very much not a fan of this movie, and I would actually put it in the like unwatchable category. I cannot believe I'm saying this. I liked Suicide Squad better than this. This was terrible. The only one I have not seen yet would be Birds of Prey, and that one might be worse from everything I've heard. I have no interest in checking it out. But
it's fun and stupid, but it's like that's about it.
Yeah. So. All right, so I'm going to pretty much wrap it up on this particular subject, because we could be talking about DC stuff all day. Like, there's a lot of, like I was talking about before, the whole Earth 1, Earth 2 thing. This is actually relatively recent news. And that's a different discussion.
A couple months ago, we did a whole podcast on, like, a whole discussion on the multiverse thing. So if you want to listen to us talk about that for an hour, go back and listen to that.
Exactly. So we're going to end it there and go on to our next subject, which we're going to try and do quickly here. Because I feel like if we don't police ourselves, we'll do this for an eternity. But we wanted to take some time to talk about the state of Star Wars, specifically with The Mandalorian and Clone Wars. So full spoilers on all of this. I should have said that with the Wonder Woman thing. But so recently I decided to sit down and do a Star Wars marathon and just kind of catch up, because The Mandalorian season 2 had ended. So I just wanted to watch everything. And when I say everything, I mean, the prequels, I mean the Clone Wars animated show, the Disney era Solo and Rogue One movies, as they fit there in the middle, Rebels, excuse me, I'm burping because that happens, the OG trilogy, and the Mandalorian seasons. But I had actually made the conscious decision that I was not going to watch the Disney trilogy, because to me that cannot be canon. It cannot possibly exist in the same universe of events. Much like Wonder Woman 84, to me, is so absurdly stupid. There's no way you can tell me this fits here. So I just didn't watch that. But what was new to me, I had seen all of this except for the season 7 of Clone Wars. That was a new thing that Disney more or less did as an apology for The Last Jedi. And then Mandalorian seasons 1 and 2 I had never actually watched any of. And I'd love to get your thoughts. You've watched all of this, right?
Yeah, so I thought season 7 of Clone Wars, truth be told, I've never been a big Clone Wars guy. I was always with the mindset that I much prefer the Tartakovsky, is that his name? The original animated Clone Wars series from 2003. I like that a lot better.
Yeah, I know what you're talking about, yeah.
Yeah, I thought season 7 was good. I really liked the Siege of Mandalore stuff. The fleshing out of Order 66 I thought was really cool. It basically just put like a nice little bow on some of the story elements, linking the episode 3 to the original series, and to Solo and Rogue One, and Rebels. I thought it was pretty good. Mandalorian on the other hand is like a whole other kind of ball of wax. You had never seen the first season either until this marathon, correct?
That is correct, yeah.
So I watched it. I assume when most people watched it when it first came out last year. The first season of The Mandalorian I thought was incredible. The way it kind of fleshed out the kind of the unseen underworld parts of the Star Wars mythos and everything. Having fan service moments but not egregious. And season 2 I think in general is more of the same, but the way it ties in to the other bits of Star Wars continuity, yes, it's fan servicey in some aspects. So, like, the cynic in me is like, well, I think the first season's better because it didn't have any, like, Jedi and shit in it. But then I'm seeing characters like Bo-Katan, Ahsoka Tano, and, you know, big spoilers, Luke fucking Skywalker. And I'm like, I don't give a shit. It's fucking awesome. I loved it. I fucking loved it. Fucking Jon Favreau is god of all nerddom at this point. And, yeah.
He really is, isn't he? Like,
yeah.
He starts the
MCU. The savior of Star Wars.
Savior of Star Wars. He starts the MCU. I was never a big fan of Elf, but everybody's like, oh, he created, like, one of the greatest Christmas movies ever. But, you know, and then he's just got his own career of other random things. Anyway, so, yeah, with Star Wars, the thing is, we could talk about this, like, for hours, so I'm going to try and keep this really brief. Like, here's my quick review of various Star Wars movies. I think the prequels are obviously flawed, but they have a lot of really strong elements in them that are better explored when you watch the Clone Wars CGI show. Now, I know that he was talking about the 2D show, which was good. It's just that it's not canon anymore. It just isn't. So you can enjoy it. There's nothing wrong with that. What's funny about that is when they were making the CGI show, the animated show was still canon. So like the first, there's 2 discs if you were to buy the DVD set of the 2D show. The first disc is all stuff that takes place before the CGI show even starts. So you could argue that still fits. I mean, it even shows like how Anakin went from his episode 2 look to his episode 3 look, and how he got his hair, like that little Padawan hair thing they do. He got that removed. Yeah. Like all that stuff is in there. How he got that slash on his eye, all of that is in there. It's just that none of that is canon anymore. So it's just kind of interesting. But the second disc is very much not canon because it contradicts things that happen in other continuities. Anyway, I love the CGI show. The problem with the CGI show is it has that terrible... Like, the Clone Wars movie is where you have to start, and that movie is really bad. Like, not Wonder Woman 1984 bad, but bad. And like...
Even season 1 and 2 are kind of rough. Like...
Yeah, they get better. Like, season 1 is better than the movie, and season 2 is better than season 1. But it's really not till season 3 are like, oh, this doesn't suck. And then it becomes really good. And then the problem was when Disney bought Star Wars, they basically ended production on season 6. Like, it was one of the first thing they axed because Warner Brothers had a stake in it, and that was their competition. So they didn't want them to have anything to do with it. And then they formed Rebels. So there was a lot of fan demand, and after The Last Jedi basically ripped the base in half, Disney, to kind of appease fans, said, hey, you know what we can do? We can go back and finish Clone Wars. Would you like that? And so that's what they did. They basically did 3 4-episode arcs. The Bad Batch was the first one. I don't even remember what the second one was about. But that last arc... Oh, the second arc was about Ahsoka, kind of what she's doing now that she's not in the Jedi Order. But before the events of Revenge of the Sith. That's pretty much what it was. But that last 4 episodes, which is basically what Ahsoka is doing while Revenge of the Sith is happening, is like... That's the Clone Wars movie we should have got. That is some of the best Star Wars ever put to screen. Mm-hmm. Is that 4-episode arc. It's absolutely fantastic. The problem with it is that it doesn't function on its own. Like, you have to know Clone Wars, at least rudimentary. You have to know some of the highlights, and you have to have seen Revenge of the Sith. But it is amazing. And then, it sets up, like, why Ahsoka wasn't really hunted for all those years, and all this great stuff you should really check out. So I thoroughly enjoyed that. And then, I've already said things on Solo. I think it was harmless but amusing. Rogue One, I think, is the best of the Disney era movies, even though it clearly has major flaws in it. I'm not going to say the OG trilogy is perfect, but what the hell, let's just call it that because everybody already loves it anyway. So then you go with The Mandalorian, which was the new material. We're not talking about the Disney trilogy because to me those don't even exist. But The Mandalorian, so I didn't really know what to expect because when I went into this initially, everybody's like, "Oh, it's so great, and I was just like, the basic premise, and you have to understand that I didn't know much about it other than you get to see a guy in a Mandalorian outfit, so I just think of, oh, he's a guy in a Boba Fett suit. is going to do some stuff. And I'm just like, I don't get the whole boner for Boba Fett thing. I've never understood it, whatever. So I was kind of not super on board. I was just kind of going to watch it because I was going to watch it. And then it kind of sold me pretty quick when I realized, like, no, this is what competent Star Wars storytelling can be. And it flies directly in the face of all these people who say, like, the Star Wars universe is super limited. You have to have, like, certain things for it to be Star Wars. It has to have lightsabers, and it has to have Jedi and Sith, and it has to have all these, like, stereotypes. We like to think of it as a bigger universe, but it doesn't necessarily function that way. This goes like, no, it totally does. Like, it's just a universe, and all those things exist in it. So as long as you tell a competent story, that's great. And they set up who the Mandalorian was. They made you like him as an individual character with enough nostalgic ties and connections to the just recently defunct Return of the Jedi, events, that you feel like ingrained in that universe, and it feels very real. And I'm with you where season 2, I was, I tried to avoid anything about the show, but you click around on the internet, you can't help but see certain things trending or whatever that just kind of ruins stuff for you. Meaning like, oh, Luke is back, Ahsoka's back, blah, 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 blah. And especially in the age of algorithms, it's almost impossible to avoid because, it's like, oh, I like Star Wars. So my phone just like, it just gives me a news feed interview with, Rosario Dawson about what it's like to play Ahsoka Tano. I was like, what? Yeah. Why would I want you fucking asshole phone? I did not want that information. But anyway, so you pick up some of that through just the natural process of, osmosis on the internet. But so as I'm watching it, I was kind of like, I kind of hope this isn't dumb. But it was actually perfect. It was just that way of being like, these characters, but here's what they're doing. And here, it's not a stupid thing that they're doing. Just like, we're shoehorning them in, like Ponda Baba in Rogue One, where he's like butt-face alien guy, and that dude with the messed up face and the pig nose, where you're like, you better watch yourself, because I'm going to go piss off somebody in a bar and get my arm chopped off tomorrow. Like, I don't need to see what the character was doing the day before, but that's just dumb fan service. This is good. This is where they show you the logical conclusion of what these characters have gone through. And, it sets up hints of what's going to happen. And, like when they mentioned Thrawn. And now, if I had just watched Rebels, and at the end of Rebels, have you seen Rebels?
Yes.
At the end of Rebels, Thrawn is basically thwarted by being jumped into hyperspace along with Ezra Bridger. And the whole point is you're not really supposed to know what to do. It's pretty obvious in hindsight that they wanted to keep Thrawn, but he was in the wrong section of the timeline. So there was no way to do this other than he mysteriously vanishes. And that's why he's not around for the original trilogy. So supposedly he's coming back. There's even talk that Robert Downey Jr. might be playing him, which would be kind of fascinating.
Oh, that'd be interesting.
Yeah, we're not going to go too much into all the behind the scenes because now there's like a million different Star Wars shows being announced, and they're all supposed to connect together, kind of like the way the Netflix Marvel shows, like each had these own seasons, and then they did their like Defenders miniseries where they all linked up. That's kind of what they're sort of doing with Star Wars, and that's where it's going to kind of sit for a while before they go back to the big screen. I know the next one up is actually, we mentioned it briefly, was the Rogue Squadron movie that Patty Jenkins is going to do.
Yeah.
So all I want to say is I actually really enjoyed Mandalorian Season 2. I thought it was fantastic. And I think that this is truly the Return of the Jedi sequel that we didn't really get out of the Disney trilogy. And at the moment, I mean, I'm not going to go too much into this, but if you watch if you're following the news, like the corporate behind the scenes news of what's happening over at Lucasfilm, they're basically a split company. There's like the Kathleen Kennedy division, which is kind of pushing. They were the ones who made the Disney trilogy, and then there's like the Jon Favreau, Dave Filoni division, who made The Mandalorian and makes Rebels. And it's really obvious when you watch the show. Those two guys are like cohabitating on like what we should do to undo what Kathleen Kennedy did, including things like the Veil of the Force. That's like a time travel element that allows them to fix certain stuff.
Hold on.
And they're clearly cooperating.
I have to bring this up because it came on autoplay after I watched on Disney Plus Soul, the new Pixar movie. It a couple days ago, it automatically started playing the Lego Star Wars Holiday Special. Oh, totally off topic. Did you see that?
No, because I know about it. It's the thing that Kathleen Kennedy did to pit up against Mandalorian Season 2.
It's so stupid. I mean, granted, I think it's fucking hilarious in some aspects, the way it like just skewers elements of the sequel trilogy, and it's like it's kind of just a bunch of memes and internet jokes about Star Wars in general in like a Lego movie form. I ended up sitting through the entire thing because I'm a glutton for punishment. I recommend you do too, just out of fascination for what you think of it.
We shall see. I don't know if I hate myself enough, but but anyway, so yeah, Star Wars is in a weird place. And for those who are like, I guess I want to end it like this because we'll just keep talking if we don't cut it off here at some point. But I want to end it like this. There is, as Luke Skywalker once inspired, there is hope again in the Star Wars galaxy, and it is through the Dave Filoni and Jon Favreau division. It's at least now that we have numbers to back this up. When you see the massive success of The Mandalorian and everything those guys are doing versus the cataclysmic failure of everything the Kathleen Kennedy division is doing, I think it's just a matter of time until, you know, she's really just gone. And the reason her being gone is a good thing is just then we don't have to have pointless identity politics in Star Wars anymore, and we don't have to have poor storytelling in Star Wars anymore. And we can go back to just actually telling a good, worthwhile, interesting story, and you can fix all this, and Star Wars can be good again. It'll be a good time, hopefully, if we just let those guys go. I know at the moment Jon Favreau is completely shielded by Disney from Kathleen Kennedy's interference, and then people are always quick to point out, like, oh, but she has like a producer credit. She has a producer credit because she's technically the head of Lucasfilm. Behind the scenes, she has no say in anything that happens with that show. So I'm, you know, she was the one who can come out there on stage and say we're a unified thing, but apparently that's very much not the case. And have you heard the story? Like, they're already starting to remodel Disneyland to get rid of the whole Galaxy's Edge thing. Yeah. Like, Kathleen Kennedy's disgusting version of Star Wars is on its way out, everybody. It's going to take a while to undo that kind of damage, and there's certain things you can never really undo because, you know, you can't bring Carrie Fisher back. Maybe you can convince Harrison Ford to do something different if he's still around. But that's it. You know, never
gonna happen.
So we'll see.
Happen.
We will see. Hey, they got him back for Rise of Skywalker. Yeah, as brief as it was. We'll see. We will see. But I think you can get Mark Hamill back, especially after the reception of The Mandalorian. But we'll see. That's down the road. Anyway, I think that's going to do it here for. Do you have anything else to say? I'm sorry, I should have asked.
Yeah, I'm just gonna wrap it up by saying, you know, I think I am hopeful about the future of Star Wars at the moment because of Clone Wars, because of you know, the most recent season of Mandalorian, and there's a reason to be hopeful because rebellions are built on hope.
And you just quoted the Disney Star Wars. That's called Unity.
I quoted Rogue One. That doesn't count.
Which is Disney Star Wars, but I agree with you. That's like that's the only one that everybody kind of likes. Yeah, I like that movie. The last act of it, the last third of it is incredible. It's a lot. It's very fan servicey, but not to the point of being obnoxious. You know, I really liked it, even though it does present a couple of continuity problems, but it also gives a lot of continuity, and I love that. But that's a different story. Anyway, so that'll do it for us for now, because again, we would talk about Star Wars endlessly. Maybe one day we'll do just like a Star Wars special, maybe a holiday special. Yeah, exactly. We missed that, so like when May the 4th comes around or whatever, maybe we could do that then. Anyway, so I want to thank Rob, I guess, for coming back. If you like Rob, remember Rob is DLC on this podcast. So the way it works is if my Patreon has above 400 a month, then Rob sticks around. And if not, he's not here anymore. And so you vote with your wallet, economics, whatever. But anyway, in all seriousness, thank you very much for the support, everybody. And that obviously includes the actual Patreon backers who are listening to this early, as well as the ones who got shout outs and pick subjects for us, which would be Abdullah, Connor Wright, Sea-Dog, or Caleb, Julian Espinoza, Eduardo Cruz, Michael Kelly, Luis Bonilla, Joseph Tamburino, Trey Wagner, and of course Leafy Poo, and obviously Rob
Abdullah. And Abdullah.
Yeah. Well, I said Abdullah at the beginning. He was literally the first name I mentioned.
You should say it again, because Abdullah,
of course I'm going to say it again. I wasn't
always
done talking.
Always a pleasure talking.
You should know this about me by now. I'm never done talking. But yes, obviously, thank you to Abdullah for also joining us here today. That was great of him to do. But yeah, thank you very much. All the description has the Patreon. It has all the other social stuff, the Twitter, Instagram, all that fun stuff. Appreciate that as well. Rob, where can people find you?
You can follow me at Grappadora_gaming on Instagram. Drop in and say, yo.
Cool. And anything else you'd like to say before we go?
Happy New Year, you filthy animals.
Fuck you. All right. Anyway, thank you very much, everybody. Happy New Year, and have a good one.